Hello and welcome to another edition of D&D Stories. My name is Rob from the channel Performance Check, and this is the show where we sit around and I regale you with tales about the time when something cool happened in the hit role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. So, last time, Valdane and Theodrex had been travelling to Agistel, the capital of the Kingdom of Ireland, to send warning to the king himself that his realm is besieged by a host of marauding reavers who are being led by seemingly an infernal host, an infernal leader. Valdane the Sorcerer and Theodrex, the Ranger of Hemlon, had defeated this leader. He had appeared, this tiefling with silvery skin and heavy armour and an onyx blade, had appeared before them and proclaimed that the Devil's Line will once again take its place in supremacy over the Kingdom of Ireland. And after a vicious battle, it was the Sorcerer and the Ranger that proved to be victorious. However, the Rangers of Hemlon saw it fit to send Theodrex and Valdane to pledge to the king, to plead to the king that help was required, as the family lines of all who live within Ireland and the surrounding regions are in danger and under threat from this strange, shadowy cult that appears to be attacking at will. Theodrex had agreed to this task because he wanted to absolve himself of his past crimes. Theodrex, as you might remember, is an exiled Ranger of Hemlon, and was taking this as an opportunity to maybe mend some bridges, even though it has not been fully proved that Theodrex was guilty of the task and the crime that he was exiled for. But now, him and Valdane, a sorcerer who had detected strange magical phenomena echoing throughout the land, travelled south to Agistel with this warning. They had randomly encountered a T-Rex which had swallowed Theodrex whole, but they had bested it and Theodrex had barely survived. He was basically on death's door as he was being eaten by this terrifying dinosaur, which, by the way, still a bit strange that a dinosaur appeared in the middle of Ireland, this frosty, cold nation, but you know, it was Mike's first time properly DMing, and he wanted to drop a T-Rex in, so that's what happened. There was a T-Rex, and after a vicious battle, it was defeated. Once the creature had been slain, Valdane placed his arcane mark upon the dead creature's head and gave a mysterious remark as to the reason why. Theodrex and Valdane continued and eventually reached the walls of Agistel, this grim-looking, dour fortress city in the middle of an icy tundra. And they attempted to go inside and discovered that there was indeed a royal wedding that was to occur, where the prince and Lady Maya Windermere of the neighbouring nation of Fereld were to be married, to forge an alliance between those two kingdoms, the Kingdom of Ireland and Fereld. Valdane and Theodrex obviously want to take word to the king as soon as possible, but to meet the king would be impossible at this stage, allegedly, they have been told, for all of the king's court and usual proceedings have been postponed whilst these wedding ceremonies were to occur. Celebrations, rather. And Theodrex and Valdane had decided, as we last left them, that to properly get word to the king as promptly as possible, they would be required to attend this wedding. And that is where we left them. And this is where we continue the story of the Devil's Line, Part 3. So, says Valdane, looking at Theodrex, we have all of today to prepare for tomorrow. We shall attend the wedding, and then hopefully at some point we'll be able to approach the king, and we'll be able to tell him what's going on. And Theodrex says, why do we need to prepare? Why? Can't we just wait and go in and speak to him, and then that's our job done, as far as I'm concerned? And Valdane says, absolutely, but more opportunities may raise their heads. We want to be prepared, Theodrex, and also we want to make a good impression. It is very important that we make an impact tomorrow. And Theodrex says, why? I just want to get a drink. And of course, Theodrex, who you might remember, still suffers from alcohol addiction. He's getting the shakes. He wants a drink. There'll be plenty of drinking to be had at this wedding as well, says Valdane. But in my experience, it's often well advised to become indispensable to those who have power within these regions. And TheWriter says, what do you mean? And Valdane says, well, what do you think I mean? It means we'll have more resources if we make the right friends. It means that we will have more opportunities if we put ourselves in that particular path. TheWriter sort of just grumbles and says, fine, what then? Valdane had asked this merchant who they'd spoken to on entry of Agistel. He'd asked whether he had fine clothes. And the merchant had a few bits and pieces, and they decide it's probably best that they look their best when they attend. So Valdane, he keeps his coat, but he has it cleaned. He doesn't want to get rid of his iconic coat, but he has a new waistcoat that's embossed with different embroidery. New boots as well he gets. He really wants to look the part. Combs his hair back so you can see all the white that runs through his hair. TheWriter buys a new cloak, this gorgeous, deep green flowing cloak. He also gets some new pieces of clothing, like a vest that goes over his shirt, for example, and he's got new trousers. He also gets a new pair of boots as well. Some fingerless archery gloves as well. He really looks the part. TheWriter goes for a distinguished sort of ex-military kind of look, whereas Valdane is more a man of the court. Looking at this point, like they both are very, very distinctly different in the way they look. However, as they walk through the streets of the city with their new clothes, they have this feeling of empowerment, this feeling that they are ready to take on the whole world. And they spend the day trying to think about how they can best approach the king. Now, they overhear, we actually get given a listen check, and we... no, in fact, actually, I think we did some gather information. We did a gather information roll, and Valdane was able to determine that to enter the wedding at all, they will need an invitation. The actual ceremony itself is a closed affair. Only a certain fee will be allowed within the Temple of Celestius, the chosen deity of Agistel. Only a chosen few will be allowed within the temple to witness the ceremony, but many, many more have invitations, those of nobility and those who have positions of standing and power within the city and the surrounding regions, get to come to the evening do, as it were, the banquet, the festivities afterwards. After careful consideration, Valdane and TheWriter decide that that is where they're going to show up. That's where they're going to attend. They're going to keep an eye on the wedding just in case something might happen, because look, it's a wedding. Generally in fantasy, something happens at a wedding every now and then, you know. They're going to keep a careful distance of the wedding itself and attend the evening affair. And they realise, after this searching for information, that they're going to need to acquire invitations. This is something they had not thought of. This is something that we as players hadn't considered, but Mike, the crafty DM, had already considered this and said, no, I'm afraid you're only going to get in if you have invitations. And you know that this being a royal wedding is going to be a heavily guarded affair. You're not just going to be able to waltz in. And so, Valdane and TheWriter now realise that their first task on this day is to find and acquire invitations. Now, as players, we understand already that the people that will be attending these festivities will be those of position, those of standing and power within the realm. So, Valdane and TheWriter decide that it's best to head to the noble district of Agistel, in a ring of this fortress city. And it isn't long before they encounter a rather prestigious-looking establishment known as the Cantering Club. And they arrive and they see this big swinging sign of this great stallion, this great horse, sort of like striking a pose, rearing back, and they think, this looks like a really upper class joint. Let's go in here, let's try and get some more information. They swagger in with their new looks, you know, they're feeling on top of the world, these guys. They walk in, they swing up to the barkeep, and the barkeep says, "All right, stranger." Always the same barkeep. That's a running joke throughout our games, that any tavern anywhere, always the same barkeep with that same voice. "All right, stranger, how's it going?" Valdane says, "Very good, actually, my dear sir. We are looking forward to the festivities tomorrow, but I'm afraid to say I am rather distressed. And the barkeep says, "Oh, why is that?" "I'm afraid to say that I have been rather careless, and I've travelled far across the main realm. I've travelled as far as Serador," says Valdane, thinking on his feet. "I've travelled as far as Serador, and I arrived here, and the moment I looked into my luggage, I had realised, by the gods, I had forgotten my invitation. And now it seems I've arrived in this city and will not be able to attend the wedding." And the barkeep says, "Oh, well, I'm very sorry to hear that, but I imagine they might be able to let you in if you can think of a good enough reason, you know, you can just be honest with them." And Valdane says, "Absolutely, I could 100% be honest with them, or I could find an alternate solution, if you know what I mean." And the barkeep says, "Well, I'm just a barkeep, I wouldn't understand." And Valdane says, I'm just riffing, okay? I'm just trying to understand how it might be that I might come across, say, a new invitation," says Valdane, sliding some money across the counter. And the barkeep says, "Oh, I see. Well, there's a number of individuals that have been drinking here these past nights, actually. Looking forward to it. There's one individual, a baron, that flaunts his invitation to his friends who sadly didn't receive one. He's always going on about how he is favoured by the king himself, and he himself has got a very, very prestigious invitation that he waves around to everyone." And Valdane says, "That is very interesting. Tell me, where might I find this baron?" And he says, "Oh, well, he comes in most nights, but you know, well, this secret we'll keep between us, if you don't mind." And Valdane says, "I see what you mean," and slides some more gold over to him. "Thank you very much, barkeep. You've been incredibly helpful." "Stranger," gives a nod. "Well, what do you reckon about that?" asks Valdane to Theodrex. Theodrex shrugs. "There's still only one invitation. We need two." "You're right, but it is a start. I have an idea. Why don't you prepare for the arrival of this baron, and I will introduce myself. I will introduce myself and distract him, and if indeed he flaunts his invitation as much as he says, it won't take long for him to bring up that he has one, and maybe even produce it." Theodrex says, "Okay. Then what I'll do," says Valdane, "I will cause a distraction in some way, and it will be required of you and your stealthy ways, Theodrex, to relieve the baron of his invitation." It was a good enough plan at the time. So they wait, and they wait for some time, but eventually this baron arrives within the cantering club. They learn that his name is Baron Wilbur Mitz. He is a skinny man. He looks a bit frail. He has long, greasy black hair, but you can see that he's sort of starting to lose part of it along this end. He looks a bit dodgy, a bit weird. And he comes in with a number of what can only be described as his entourage, a lot of heavy set people. It looks like he walks around the city with protection. He looks to be a man that likes to keep his back covered, as it were. Valdane and Theodrex had not anticipated this, and they watch as he walks in. It's a rather slimy guy, this Wilbur Mitz. Sort of like exchanges jokes with people, and he's got this horrible greasy cackle. "Oh, I'm going to enjoy attending the wedding tomorrow. I'm afraid that you won't be able to join me, friends, but I'll save some of the scraps from the banquet, and I will be more than happy to have my servants deliver them to you." And the rest of the people that surround him go, "Oh, shut up, okay, we want to go as well. We understand, fine, you got an invitation. We didn't, we understand. Stop rubbing it in." And it's at that point that Valdane gives Theodrex a nod and approaches. "My lord," says Valdane, reaching his arms wide in surprise, drawing the attention of basically the entire tavern to him. "My lord, it is an absolute pleasure. Could it be that I am standing before the fabled Baron Wilbur Mitz?" And Valdane gives a sharp bow, and he looks at him with a smile. And Wilbur says, that is he, I'm him. And you are Valdane, my lord. Simply just call me Valdane. Valdane, and that's all you need to know. And the Baron says, very well, that is strange. What can I do to help you? And why are you bothering me? I don't mean to bother you at all. I just couldn't help myself. I've heard so much about you, and I wanted to offer to buy you a drink. And the Baron snorts. Buy me a drink? Do I look like someone who needs to have their drinks bought for them? And he sort of like spreads his arms wide and he sort of gestures to his decorated clothing and jewellery on his fingers and around his neck. And Valdane says, no, of course not. It's merely a gesture of goodwill. For I have much to speak to you about. What could you possibly want to speak to me about? Says Baron Mitz, his sort of brows furrowing at this. Like he doesn't seem like the friendliest man. And is clearly an attention seeker. So Valdane walking into this place and being a bit of a show-off, he doesn't like him. Well, I would love to regale you with some of the stories that me and my friend Theodrex of Hemlon have encountered in this realm thus far. I'm sure you will find it enjoyable. Are you looking for money or something? Says the Baron. No, not at all. I would never dare to ask money for such a thing. No, I merely wish to entertain you and your fine men. After all, this is a time for celebration. This is a time for storytelling and singing and triumph and joy. For tomorrow we have a prestigious occasion of which I wish I could attend. The Baron's ears clearly prick up at this point. His ego now driving what he next says. Oh, you're here for the wedding, but you cannot attend, can you not? Well, I imagine I will be enjoying some of the festivities around the city and the festival, but sadly no, I regrettably have been unable to acquire an invitation to such a prestigious event. The Baron slips his horrible, pallid, grotty fingers into a pocket and he produces this rolled scroll of parchment and he undoes it and he says, well, Valdane, if that's what your name is, I have one, and I'm very much looking forward to sitting pride of place on the head table in the banquet. It's going to be a very, very enjoyable occasion. It is regrettable that you won't be able to join us. And he puts the scroll on the table. And Valdane looks down at it and smiles. Of course, well, you'll have to tell me all about it after the event. And he says, but now let me tell you a story. Let me tell you about the time when me and my friend here faced off against a titanic reptilian beast with as many teeth as there are tankards in this fine establishment. And Valdane begins railing off the story about the T-Rex, but he embellishes it slightly. He says that the T-Rex was about 100 feet tall, and how at one point Theodrex had leapt down the throat of the creature in an attempt to attack its vital organs from within. So while Valdane is telling this heroic and slightly implausible story, he's drawing everyone's attention to him, and as he delivers this speech, this story, he's stepping around, making sure that he's drawing the eye line of everyone who watches him, drawing the eye line of the Baron away from the table where sits the invitation. Theodrex sees his chance. So, mechanically, essentially how we dealt with this was Valdane was to do a performance check, a charisma-based roll, to essentially maintain people's attention, to keep them gripped by the story. And as he's telling the story, Theodrex is asked by Mike the DM to make a stealth roll to see if he can successfully just sidle up and take the invitation. Thankfully, these are two incredibly strong stats of both Valdane and Theodrex. Valdane is charisma based and Theodrex is dexterity based, so they're able to do this fairly easily, and it's like they've been working together for years. They seem to be in sync almost, and Valdane is smiling openly as he, out of the corner of his eye, is watching Theodex just walk on by, picks up the scroll, pockets it, and then walks back to the bar. As the story concludes, Valdane gives a flourish and a bow, and the entire collected audience essentially give like a cheer and a round of applause, and people rush to buy Valdane drinks, and he gets like a crowd around him, which means he is gradually moved away from the Baron's table, and the Baron is sort of like smirking. He didn't enjoy it. He didn't like the fact that Valdane got this kind of recognition. Valdane is able to give Theodex a nod, and Theodex sidles out of the tavern. Valdane decides he's going to stay for a bit so it doesn't look dodgy, but already the Baron is looking at the table and goes, the invitation. Where's my invitation? And he's looking to his men. It was right here. It was right here. And he starts upturning the table and he's looking around to find the invitation, but it's gone. And Valdane's like, Baron Mitz. Approaching him with like a shit-eating grin on his face. He goes, Baron Mitz. Oh, what's the matter? The invitation, it's gone. Oh, I'm so sorry. And the Baron says, was it you? And Valdane says, me? Me? No, of course not. I was standing there performing. I have nothing to do with it. Another charisma roll. Ace it. Even though he didn't technically steal it, he's not lying, but he's like, didn't see anything. No, what are you talking about? It's not me. He says, by all means, have your men search me. And the men do. They search around there. They're like, sorry, Baron, he's not got anything, they say. The Baron is losing his mind, and he says, you distracted me, like I was keeping my attention to you when I should have been. And he looks mortified. He looks horrified that he's now lost this invitation. And Valdane says, well, I'm sure if you're as prestigious as you have been, named about this establishment, I'm sure they will let you in without one. And the Baron doesn't look certain. He says the security, they're very, very, very stern about this. They're very, very firm on the fact that if you don't have an invitation, you won't get in. I am so sorry to hear that. Well, have a pleasant evening. I must be on my way. And with a curt nod, he walks out of the tavern. Valdane and Theodex are absolutely overjoyed by the fact that they've got one over on that slimy guy. Like, they're like, oh yes, and they sort of doing like a little celebration outside in the alleyway beside the countering club. And Valdane says, well, that's one down, we need another. By this point, it's already late in the day, it's now dark, night has fallen, and they don't have long to work out where they're going to get their next invitation. And Theodex comes up with a plan, and he says, surely we're in better chance of finding an invitation if we wait to the last moment. What do you mean, says Valdane. Well, everyone with an invitation will be arriving for the banquet. Surely that's when we can strike, that's when we can get hold of another one. Or perhaps there'll be some other way that we can find our way in. Okay, says Valdane, that's probably the best idea. You're right, there is wisdom there. Let's rest, and tomorrow we shall find our way in. And they agree, and they find lodgings for the night and sleep. It is the next morning, and already the streets are packed with people wanting to get a glance at the royal procession, and ideally the prince and the princess. Theodex and Valdane have already planned for this, however, knowing that this was going to be a busy place and knowing that they want to keep an eye on the wedding. They have set up on a nearby rooftop. They are looking down upon the thoroughfare that leads up to the Temple of Stars, the Temple of Celestius. And they are sat there, they've got a bit of lunch with them, and they are watching from afar. They see the procession coming, and they see for the first time this prince and princess sort of riding on noble-looking white steeds. And behind them there is a procession led by an older-looking man, heavy-set and full armour, with a long grey beard and a crown upon his head. This must be King Magnus that they've heard so much about, and Prince Eustan, his son, who is to be married. And they watch, and they go into this huge temple. The crowd are cheering. They notice that there are hundreds of guards everywhere. Like, every corner has a division ready to stop any trouble from happening. This makes everyone in the city, I suppose, feel a bit secure, but also it makes Valdane and Theodrex think, if, you know, they try something, they could be, perhaps their actions could be misconstrued as something that's a threat. So they're going to need to obviously make sure that they approach the situation with care. And it isn't long before this procession goes up to this temple and the doors close. And that must be where the wedding is going to begin. So Valdane sort of sits back, and Theodrex is sort of like sharpening one of his knives on the roof. And they think, we're going to need to get another invitation somehow. But where? I know. Valdane gets the invitation, the one they'd taken from the Baron, and presses it into Theodrex's hands. You take this. Perhaps there'll be some way that I can convince them to let me through. Valdane is going to trust in his abilities to bluff to get into the wedding. It is much later in the day now, and the two have descended from their rooftop vigil and begin approaching the fortress at the centre of Agistel. This is where the king resides, and this is where the banquet is to take place. And Valdane and Theodrex find that there is a entrance, one that is guarded by a number of soldiers. There is an escort, like a convoy of guests being led through the streets from the ceremony. And this is where they realise that this is the time. This is what they've been waiting for. So stealthily, slyly, they slip into the procession without anyone noticing, and they're just walking along. And Theodrex has to stifle a laugh because he sees near the back there is Baron Wilbur Mitz, who is looking particularly shifty and is part of this procession, and he has, it seems, managed to ingratiate himself into this convoy. And they realise with horror, they know that Valdane has already told him that they don't have invitations. So Valdane's like, Theodrex, stop drawing attention to us. He'll know. And Theodrex says, but he doesn't have an invitation either. He'll know. And they look, and it's at that point that they make eye contact with the Baron, and he goes, and Valdane goes, they both know that if the other says something else, they will rumble the other. It's a very, very tense walk as the Baron is just staring with evil in his eyes as they approach the banquet. This is an unexpected issue that they're probably going to have to resolve quickly, or it may get out of hand. It's Theodrex who takes the initiative, and he looks to Valdane and says, keep walking. Find some way to get yourself in. I'm going to deal with this. And Valdane says, what are you going to do? We're surrounded by guards and we're surrounded by people in this convoy. And Theodrex just gives him a wink and just stops walking. And the crowd, the convoy sort of like push past him, and Theodrex disappears into the crowd. Valdane, slightly panicked, goes, okay, and just keeps walking, like, and trusts that Theodrex is going to sort it out. Theodrex has stopped walking because he wants to fall into step with the Baron, who is just behind them. And he does, and Theodrex is walking next to the Baron, and he says, little bird tells me you don't have an invitation, Baron. And the Baron says, what is it to you? Theodrex says, I just find it interesting that you're going to attempt to get in without one. Now, of course, if you don't want any attention drawn to the fact that you don't have the required documentation, then I suggest you do exactly as I say. You mean to blackmail me? I could blackmail you. I know you don't. Wait, was it you? Was it you who took my invitation? I should call the guards. It is at this point that Theodrex says, or rather Matt, who's playing Theodrex, says, I want to, as best as I can, shove the Baron to an alleyway as the convoy walks by. And Mike's like, that's going to draw quite a lot of attention if you just outright attack someone. And that's why Matt says, okay, we'll put whatever, give them as many spot checks as you want. Give them as many chances to see this happen. This is what I want to do. I want to try and grab the Baron, and I want to try and drag him into an alleyway. Mike says, well, he isn't exactly, a strong warrior type. Essentially he is a standard NPC, really. So it's more going to be about how you perform this and how you don't get spotted, rather than if you can just shove him. So as a formality, he does the grapple attack thing, which he easily succeeds. And then we're sort of like on tenterhooks waiting for Matt to roll again, to see if he can stealthily steal this Baron into an alleyway without anyone seeing. This would be a feat of stealth, beyond anything we've seen from TheWriter so far. And he rolls, and he makes it. Somehow, within the confusion of the convoy, TheWriter whips his cloak, grabs hold of the Baron, and shoves him into an alleyway, and then proceeds to beat the Baron to an inch of his life, within an inch of his life, just throws him onto the ground and just goes BAM! 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 Just punching him over and over again into the face to knock him out, to knock him unconscious. Meanwhile, the convoy that Valdane is quite close to the front of has arrived at the fortress gates, and before them they see guards inspecting invitations from the nobles, checking them carefully before allowing them through. Valdane's sort of hands are like doing that at his sides, like he's sort of like psyching himself up because he knows he's going to have to talk his way through this. And then all of a sudden he realizes something. He realizes that he might be able to get an invitation after all. TheWriter has the first one. Perhaps there's one last chance that he can use to get the invitation. So he waits until he is right at the front of the queue, and he spots what the guards are doing with the invitations. They are taking them and putting them inside like a small guardhouse. Valdane waits. And he waits until he's right at the front, like only one person is in front of him before his invitation is going to be inspected, but he still doesn't have one. Valdane closes his eyes and concentrates, and then at his side he gestures with the somatic components of Mage Hand, and from the guardhouse, one of these invitations fly out, and he catches it in his hand and does that. Looks around. Looks like he's got away with it. And he goes up to the guard and the guard says, invitation, present it. And Valdane says, gladly. And he holds it up. And the guard looks at it with squinted eyes and he says, an invitation to Cecily Hayward. Valdane is just like, yes, Cecily Hayward, that is my name. Lady Cecily Hayward. Yeah, says Valdane, his voice slightly going higher. Look, I like to take kind of like a fluid gender role. I roll a persuade, a bluff, and yet somehow manage to convince the guard that Valdane, just is a bit flexible when it comes to those kind of things, or at least he convinces the guard that he is, and the guard's like, oh, okay, in you go. And Valdane goes through. Valdane stops on the other end of the gate, and Theodrex is walking up, wiping blood from his knuckles, and is able to easily show an invitation. But he keeps his head down, and he gets let through. And they're in. Finally, they're in, and now they need to find the king. So, Valdane and Theodrex, they take their place at one of these large tables within a great hall of this fortress, and the festivities begin almost immediately. Music strikes up, and great platters of food are brought out, of the finest quality. Valdane and Theodrex probably have never eaten this well in their entire lives, like royal banquet. There's suckling pigs, there's steaks of all different kinds of cuts of meat, There's strange vegetables that have come from faraway lands and cooked in the ways of 100 different cultures. They are enjoying themselves in this lavish setting. TheWriter is finally relieved. He's able to have his drink for the day, swilling down tankard upon tankard of ale. But Valdane says, don't get too engrossed in the food and drink, TheWriter. We need you sharp. And TheWriter says, this is the way I stay sharp, Valdane. Just watch it. Let me get on with it. Valdane's like, all right, okay, just saying. Don't get too much. Trying to keep themselves to themselves. And it isn't long after there has been much feasting that the king, the prince, and the princess arrive at the head table, and everyone stands and cheers, and many toasts begin. And the king steps forth, King Magnus, and he says, members of my court, I am a proud father, and I am pleased to say that my son is indeed proud of his achievements. And he sort of gestures to a princess, who sort of gives like a shy kind of like wave. Let's just say he could have done a lot worse, and everyone sort of laughs. This lady that they're seeing now a little bit up closer is incredibly beautiful. TheWriter is just like, Valdane is a bit more cool about it, you know, because he's my character. No, I'm kidding. No, but they're both very, very taken with the fact that this woman is incredibly beautiful. Now, please enjoy the festivities, and we can revel, knowing today is a good day. Valdane sees his opportunity, and he looks to TheWriter and he says, remember, we need to make an impact. And he stands. Valdane stands, and TheWriter is like, what are you doing? Valdane says, Your Highness! His voice carries as if it has been magically augmented. Well, in fact, it has. Valdane wants to get everyone's attention, including the king's. You are correct, it is indeed a good day, and I see that a good many people are having a very good time. But is it good, Highness? Is it kingly, Your Highness, to be revelling and enjoying such fine company and such fine food and wine when your kingdom is under siege? There is deadly silence. And the king, King Magnus, is sort of just staring down at this individual, Valdane. He's just staring at him. Under siege, he says, what do you speak of? And how dare you interrupt the king of this land? I'm afraid, Your Highness, that this was indeed the only way in which we could get word to you in time. It is under your command that the courts will not be in session for at least another week. And another week we do not have. The king is just glaring down at the sorcerer. You can see just hatred and anger boiling in his eyes, having been interrupted. And he says, the courts indeed are not in session, for this is a royal occasion and a moment of destiny for our kingdom, the joining of two kingdoms, of that of Ireland and Pereld. It is our tradition, it has been our way for 600 years. And Valdane says, be that as it may, your land is troubled, and while you eat well tonight, there are many who shall never eat, breathe, or sleep again, because of what is happening in this land, because of the turmoil created by an infernal threat. TheWriter slowly gets to his feet. Your Highness, my name is TheWriter of Hemlon. I am a ranger and a warden of the lands to the north. Long have my people served by monitoring those lands in keeping it free of darkness and evil. But I'm afraid to say that my friend and comrade is correct, that there is indeed a darkness at the heart of this land, and you needed to be informed about it, for it would seem that the lines, all family lines of this land, are under threat from this villainous cult. Cult? What cult? Says the king. We don't really know their name, says Valdane. You don't know their name, says the king. You interrupt me and you interrupt my son's wedding feast to say that there is a threat, and a threat that you cannot name. Valdane looks at TheWriter. who opens his cloak and he brings forth the onyx blade. The onyx blade taken from the tiefling they'd fought in the Vale. Theodrex casts it onto the table and says, "This, if you would have it examined, is proof that there is indeed an infernal threat at large within your realm. And it would seem that all of your family lines, including your own, the lines of this land, are under threat from these people, these forces of evil. I will not be told of what evil dwells within my kingdom." The king's voice booms from the head table, clearly livid at the situation now, and he looks to his guards and gives them a nod. And the royal guard, the king's guard, begin to converge on Valdane and Theodrex. Guests are sort of looking panicked and sort of some are starting to stand, trying to get out of the way. And Valdane says, "If you would ignore this king, then it will be to your ruin and the ruin of your kingdom. How can you let your son be wedded, and how could you have this alliance be forged when your kingdom is not secure? You must listen." "I shall not listen, nor take counsel from some fool who breaks guest rights and produces a weapon at our table here in this hall. Seize them!" And the king gestures to his king's guard, who draw shining blades and begin advancing upon Theodrex and Valdane. And as they prepare to defend, as they prepare to fight the king's guard in their own hall, that is where we will leave our heroes for this edition of D&D Stories. So, Valdane and Theodrex have found the king not wanting to listen to their advice in their direct manner. Will they be able to convince him that his kingdom is indeed under siege, or will they simply be locked away in a dungeon and be forgotten for the rest of time? You'll just have to find out next time. If you'd enjoy this story, then why don't you give it a like, and if you'd like to see more like it, then of course give this channel, TheWriter, a subscribe. So, thank you very much, and as always, keep gaming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the D&D Stories Facebook, Patreon, and t-shirts on Redbubble. Keep gaming!